Paris, the city of lights and the center of the fashion world. In this episode of Video Fashion Style, we explore the art of French fashion. An in-depth exhibition at the museum at F.I.T. reveals why Paris is the capital of style.
Paris is seen as sort of the ultimate stage to present fashion. Paris has only become more important as it creams away the most successful and most talented designers from around the world.
Dive into the video fashion archives as we look back on the work of iconic French designer who invented ready-to-wear, Yves Saint Laurent. Discover how France is the home of haute couture.
In every country there is beautiful fashion, but in France we have the haute couture.
We remember the legacy of a less heralded, yet undeniably influential designer from the house of Christian Dior. Then, witness breathtaking contemporary fashion and relive iconic Paris Fashion Week shows. From Chanel to Louis Vuitton, from the classic to the contemporary, find out what makes France the capital of fashion in this episode of Video Fashion Style. In 2019, the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology mounted a dazzling exhibition titled Paris, Capital of Fashion, featuring fashion ensembles dating all the way back to the 18th century. The exhibit explored how and why Paris became the center of the fashion world.
The thesis is that Paris became and remained the most glamorous and competitive fashion capital, despite competition from other cities like New York. Not naturally, because designers didn't just spring up like mushrooms along the Seine after a rain, but because Paris was constructed over a period of hundreds of years as being the capital of fashion. And that this was not just a product of French propaganda, but actually was something that many people and groups participated in. For example, many people made money or attained prestige in New York by being associated with Paris fashion or by rebelling against Paris fashion.
The exhibit takes visitors on a voyage through time, from the splendor of the royal court to the rise of haute couture in the 19th century, right up to the runways of present day.
We have here sections on Charles Frederick Worth, Coco Chanel, Christian Dior, Yves Saint Laurent. We have some really amazing pieces by designers as different as Doucet and Rick Owens, the American who's made his home in Paris, where he's become a really integral part of the Paris fashion scene.
The work of the late great designer Karl Lagerfeld is prominently featured throughout the exhibit.
Karl is featured here both under his work for Chanel and also work that he did for Chloe. I think Karl's main importance had to do with his reviving of the House of Chanel, because it was, of course, so famous for decades under Gabrielle Chanel, but after her death it sank into irrelevance, and he performed a kind of shock surgery on the House of Chanel and woke up the Sleeping Beauty and renewed all of the tropes of Chanel, making them relevant for new generations. Paris is seen as sort of the ultimate stage to present fashion. The point of the show is to show it's not just always like that. It's something which occurs in time. It occurred in the late 17th and 18th centuries in conjunction with the court at Versailles. It happens again in the later 19th century with the rise of the haute couture. It happens repeatedly in competition with industrial fashion in cities like New York. It, of course, goes into a very deep decline under the Nazi occupation, and then revives again in the late 40s and 50s, the sort of golden age of the haute couture, and then revives again repeatedly as recently as the 1990s, and with the 21st century, ironically, with globalization and the proliferation of fashion capitals in cities all around the world, Paris has only become more important as it creams away the most successful and most talented designers from around the world.
What does the future hold for French fashion?
Only up and up, I think.
dress women the way they wanted to be dressed.
In June 2008, Yves Saint Laurent tragically lost his long battle with brain cancer, and the world mourned the loss of one of its greatest couturiers.
When Yves Saint Laurent has influenced every single designer working today, and the great designers will fully admit how strong an influence he was on them.
Yves Saint Laurent was undoubtedly one of the most influential designers of our time. For over 4 decades, he intuitively understood what women desire. He was the man who put women in pantsuits, transparent blouses, ethnic looks, and of course the tuxedo, all fashion images that we take for granted now.
If you were someone who grew up in the 60s and 70s, Yves Saint Laurent is incredibly important because during that time he really was the king of fashion, and he defined very much the aesthetic of that period.
In 1957, at 21 years of age, the young designer took the helm of the house of Christian Dior after the master's early death. In 1962, after a troubled time in the French army, Yves returned to the fashion business and opened his own couture house in Paris with partner Pierre Berger. It was the beginning of a 40-year collaboration that would produce an archive of some of the most influential couture. They also created Rive Gauche, the first ready-to-wear line from an haute couturier in 1966.
For Saint Laurent, the most important thing is his relation with women. Chanel gave freedom to women. And many years after, Saint Laurent empowered women. That's, for me, it is the greatest achievement of Saint Laurent. And for that, he gave the men's clothes to the women. He gave the suit, he gave the tuxedo, he gave the trench coats, so many things.
In January 2002, after more than 40 years revolutionizing the way women wear clothes, Saint Laurent announced his retirement. And what could only be called the biggest fashion moment of the season, the 65-year-old designer declared the permanent closure of the Saint Laurent couture line. 16 days later, Saint Laurent bid farewell with a grand retrospective show. He presented 280 iconic looks from his 40-year career, which reminded the audience just how much a part of fashion's vernacular the Saint Laurent signature had become. In 2004, Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger opened their foundation, which now houses 5,000 haute couture garments and 15,000 accessories and sketches from the great designer.
I would like to be remembered with respect. Since my time at Dior, I've learned from Christian Dior that fashion was not at all a futile profession, where one amuses oneself, but a very profound and respectable thing.
Mais une chose très profonde et très respectable.
It's a really touching moment, but what an astonishing accomplishment that he had, and also contribution to fashion and the way women feel and look about themselves. That creativity is astonishing.
For more than 40 years, Yves Saint Laurent captivated the world. His creativity, elegance, and passion will be missed.
In every country there is beautiful fashion, but in France we have the haute couture.
In France, haute couture is a term that is protected by law, and to earn the right to use the term, a fashion house must follow strict rules and be granted the designation by the French Ministry of Industry, which is reviewed annually. Haute couture is made to order and crafted by hand in a design house's Paris atelier.
Actually, if you look back into the history of haute couture, it was actually started by an Englishman, Charles Worth, in about the 1850s, 1860s.
Haute couture had its golden age in the 1950s when models paraded elegantly in couture salons, a time when designers like Dior, Balmain, Givenchy were still designing their own couture lines. And in the 60s, A young man named Yves Saint Laurent became the first couturier to open a ready-to-wear boutique.
It's a long way to make money in fashion and to build a name, to establish the image, and that is important.
The label in a couture jacket is now reinterpreted commercially for ready-to-wear collections and then trickled down further into a plethora of international licenses. These fuel a business that couldn't support a couture line on its own.
Haute couture today must be used as a booster, as an appeal for the brand. Just like when you attend an opera, you will listen the diva once, but some day later you could buy a CD of the same diva singing the same opera. And this is the same with haute couture. We share an emotion, and in some days we would like to have back this emotion, and then we buy shoes and bags and makeup and shirt, voila.
In recent years, it has been debated whether or not haute couture is on the decline. But it has continued to inspire and offer designers an outlet for creative expression.
It's where I can start to imagine and to dream again. There are no constraints with telling an emotion, sharing a story, and there's a lot of pleasure in doing that.
It's important because it's like creativity. I can do it more in the way and with the time I need.
Couture is not finished. Couture absolutely restart now, because women, they want to be more and more special.
Couture is definitely the summum, it's the top, it's the dream factory that trickles down into ready-to-wear, but it's nice to see and refreshing to see that it's not sitting on a pedestal anymore. It's really trying to become relevant, and it needs to be to survive. You need to be able to find a way to show that amazing talent, but in a way that people feel comfortable wearing it and don't want to put it behind glass and make it a piece of art.
What is important is the Fashion Week of haute couture in Paris, still very, very exciting. This is the most important.
The train means the history, the origin of the company, the travel, the new means of communication, how the world changed in the 19th century. And Marc is all about how fashion should be in this beginning of the 21st century.
After the last show, the spring show where we had the carousel, we thought, what are we going to do next? And we came up with an idea. We were like, I don't know, let's have a train. So we made a train, and then we had to create a train station for the train to go through. And then we thought, well, the women have to have some kind of luggage and baggage, and we thought it was nice to do bags that were, very chic, but very sturdy and very about practicality. So we looked at luggage and old shapes of Vuitton that was really luggage inspired. And of course we made them in small proportion, big proportion, fur, sequins, everything.
The genius of having porters carrying the accessories. So there was nothing that felt commercial about it, but it was commercial genius. And the fact that he pulled off something where the clothes felt like they belonged to the era of the romance of travel, which is of course the history of Vuitton, and yet they were so contemporary,
We started to think of this idea of a romantic trip and who these women were on a train and where they were going. This whole kind of narrative which gave us a kind of dreamy, melancholy, sort of romantic idea to create this collection. We all like the idea of exaggerating the proportions in a very elongated way with a high waist. I mean, it's super feminine, but it's not the femininity of like a tight dress and a tight waist, It was just very graceful and very elongating, I think.
I thought it was spectacular, an enormous triumph. Beautiful.
Any pieces stand up?
I wouldn't pick it apart.
It was really great. I think it's a journey people would be very happy to go on again.
I think there's something about being on a plane and being alone or, again, going somewhere or leaving somewhere that has that kind of lovely melancholia, you know, not in a dark way, but just something that lets you just escape for a bit.
In 1960, when Saint Laurent was called to serve his country in the Algerian War, the House of Dior sent for their London-based designer.
Then Mr. Bohan arrived with a sense of classic French elegance, and he made till the 80s, 90s real business success with couture.
Born in Paris, the son of a milliner, Bohan worked for a succession of designers before establishing himself at the venerable house.
If I compare with the early 60s, when I start with Dior, not too far, no, I mean, not when I start designing, which was years ahead, but from the 60s to now, it's enormous change. I mean, the people were not living the same way. We used to design, for instance, for the couture, a collection of about 200 numbers. And the fashion was, in a way, very stiff. I don't mean the clothes, I mean the spirit of it.
Though developing his own signature, Bohan wasn't looking to diverge too far from the style that had been defined by the master in the late 40s.
Well, I tried to continue this sort of sense of elegance, which is a mixture of young but refined, sophisticated and clean. It's even more with me because I'm more on that sort of side, you know.
10 years later, Bohan still remained true to the legacy of Christian Dior.
I try to keep the feeling and the spirit of it, but I follow the evolution of the time and the need of the customer and the change of, especially the technique. I try to keep the technique, certain point of the technique, which were totally exceptional, but I make an evolution of it, not as it was, because the time was different, you know.
It's hard to deny the influence of the man who led the House of Dior 3 times longer than Christian himself.
I have spent 29 years, from 61 to 89. So, well, it's difficult to say myself what the contribution was, but, well, I make the house working and continued the style.
Marc Bohan kind of went back more to the spirit of Christian Dior himself to do sort of ladylike, well-bred, well-behaved clothes.
I saw some things over the years that Marc had done for Dior that were very avant-garde, but you didn't write about them very much because they were Dior. There would be things like anoraks for evening. Well, you know, that's a pretty contemporary idea. Marc Bohan did clothes that were right for the House of Dior.
Dutch fashion designer Iris Van Herpen has become known for fusing technology with couture craftsmanship. She presented her spring 2021 haute couture collection at Paris Fashion Week. The collection, titled Roots of Rebirth, referenced fungi, roots, and spores. The inspiration was channeled through intricate pleating, laser cutting, and 3-dimensional embroidery. The runway highlighted Van Herpen's meticulous craftsmanship and was a dazzling display of contemporary haute couture.
Chanel's bigger than, a label. It's French culture and the best of French culture, because it's the part of French culture that's so democratic if we look at the history of Coco, and so Karl built that democracy.
Chanel is probably the premier fashion house within Paris today simply because of the longevity of Karl and the ability to do it season after season after season.
Inspired by the 1961 film Last Year at Marienbad, designer Karl Lagerfeld transformed the Grand Palais exhibition hall into a French garden, reminiscent of one of the film's iconic scenes. The connection between the film and the house goes even deeper. The wardrobe of the film's leading lady, Delphine Seyrig, was designed by Coco Chanel herself.
I love Chanel. Who doesn't?
Attention, s'il vous plaît, les interviews.
It's just a great mixture of ultimate elegance, but with a twist of it being contemporary. I mean, that's what Karl Lagerfeld does. He takes the heritage of Chanel and just makes it every time contemporary, new and fresh. You know, he's got a million ideas, and you know, he never ceases to surprise you, and that's just, it's genius. He is a genius.
I thought the Chanel connection was absolutely incredible, and Karl Lagerfeld put on a show which really did France proud. We had the Paris Philharmonic, an extraordinary urban garden that he created in the Grand Palais, and it was really a magnificent spectacle, and it made you understand how important Chanel is to French culture and to French industry. But really it's running like a seam through the French character, and I thought that was really on show today.
This time the entire Grand Palais was this kind of formal sort of parterre, but done in a kind of moonscape with sort of fake lava rock in black and pebbles and stones. And the catwalk alone was 350 meters.
I absolutely loved it. It definitely was one of the highlights of Paris Fashion Week so far. So such a beautiful collection, wearable, the feathers were beautiful, the new length that he showed, it really was from head to toe a winner.
Every look that came out was, you know, one more perfect than the next, and the music, and obviously this, you know, very grand setting at the Grand Palais. I mean, it was everything combined.
"90 models, and Inès de la Fressange, who used to be the original Coco Muse, returned to the Chanel catwalk after an absence of 21 years. So it was sensational.
That was so unbelievable. I'm completely overwhelmed by the whole thing. You know, we've been away for a very long time, and just when you're ready to go home, you know, you have a show like this that reminds us all why we're in fashion and what a genius Karl Lagerfeld is, and the opulence of the House of Chanel. It was just a magical, magical experience, and I'm very grateful to have had it.
From the legacy of haute couture to today's boundary-breaking designers, Paris is truly the center of the fashion world.